As a child, Elvis had a lot of health problems like asthma, bad dreams, and tummy troubles. He had a hard time sleeping and often felt sick. His family didn't have much money for doctors, so they relied on prayers to help him. Elvis also had problems with his colon from a young age, probably since he was born. His mom, Gladys, tried different things to help him, like milk of magnesia, but it didn't really solve his long-term issue. She even had to help him manually sometimes. Other family members used things like castor oil to treat sicknesses. Elvis's health problems continued throughout his life. When Elvis was young, he had bad asthma and itched a lot. He talked about it with his dad near the end of his life. The itching might have been from something he ate, not from asthma itself. Elvis also had a lot of trouble with tonsillitis, which is an infection in the tonsils. It was common for kids in his time, but Elvis kept getting it even as he grew up. His tonsils got so bad that they had holes in them. When he became famous for his singing, he didn't want to have surgery to remove his tonsils because he thought it might affect his voice. As a child, Elvis probably wouldn't have had the surgery because his family didn't have enough money for it, so they just dealt with it. When Elvis was about 6 years old, he got really sick with a bad throat infection and a high fever. His parents, Vernon and Gladys, were very scared and thought he might not make it. They prayed to God for help, and by the next day, Elvis started to get better. Elvis's parents were always worried about him because he didn't eat much and his body temperature was always higher than normal. They could see he didn't have the same strength as other kids, but in the 1940s, they didn't know what was really wrong with him in Mississippi. During the time when Elvis was young in Tupelo, his mom, Gladys, wasn't very healthy. She didn't talk much about it because people kept their health problems private back then. Even Guy Harris, who grew up nearby, didn't know much about Gladys' health issues. His mom told him not to ask about it, saying that what Gladys and her talked about stayed between them. So we don't know exactly what health problems Gladys had during those years. Elvis knew he was born into a poor family and that his life was different from some of the other kids. This became clear when he started 7th grade and met kids from wealthier areas. He became friends with Roland, who also came from a poor background. Elvis's mom bought him his first guitar when he was in 7th grade, and he started taking it to school with him. They moved a few times, living in a small shack where his mom realized they couldn't make enough money to get by. Elvis understood that if his family was ever going to have a better life, he would have to make it happen. They moved again to a house for white people in a decent neighborhood for black people. A man named Ulysses S. Mayhorn remembered that in their area, both white and black poor families lived together and got along well. They all faced the same struggles and hardships. Even though they were poor, they believed that God would help them. But even though they were all in the same situation, there were still big differences between rich and poor people. Even after Elvis became famous and could mix with any social group, he felt more comfortable with people from his own background. He treated everyone the same because that's how he was raised. His mom, Gladys, was proud of this and said that Elvis never acted like he was better than others. She said he would always remember where he came from and that they were country people, and Elvis would always be a country boy. Elvis didn't live long enough to write his own story, but if he did, it would be similar to Johnny Cash's, with a mix of pride for the past and knowing that things weren't always easy. They both missed the simple, hard days filled with freedom, love, and appreciation for small things. Elvis wished he could go back to his childhood in Tupelo, Mississippi, where he had a lot of freedom. Even after becoming famous, he would return to show people where he grew up. In Tupelo, Elvis was just like other kids, playing and exploring with his friends. When he thought about a happy life, he said it needed someone to love, something to look forward to, and something to do. He had all of those things in Tupelo. Elvis's family moved from Mississippi to Memphis in 1948, leaving their old life behind. They had moved to Tupelo before to escape sharecropping, but now they hoped Memphis would offer a better life. Elvis was just 13 years old and hadn't taken on the responsibility of getting his family out of poverty yet. They had very few belongings and all fit into an old green Plymouth car. Not only were the Presleys in the car, but also Elvis's aunt, uncle, and cousins were looking for a better place too. It was a tight squeeze for people who had worked hard all their lives but didn't have much to show for it. Elvis remembered, "We were broke, man, broke. and we left Tupelo overnight. Dad packed all our belongings and we just headed for Memphis. Things had to be better. After World War II, the country was doing well, but Elvis's family, many people moved to big cities like Memphis for a better life. However, even though Memphis grew a lot, poverty was still a big problem. The Presley family lived in cheap places like a big house divided. They shared bathrooms and common areas with other families. They had to pay $9.50 a week for rent. They lived like this with 15 other families. Elvis's cousin Billy Smith and his family were very poor when they moved. They had to dig through trash cans to find food because they didn't have much money. Billy remembered eating bruised bananas because they were so poor. Elvis's friend Priscilla said that he always remembered what it was like to be poor. Even Sammy Davis Jr., another friend of Elvis, knew this was true. Sammy was offered a song called "In the Ghetto," but he didn't sing it because Elvis, on the other hand, had lived through it and could connect with the song. In Tupelo, Elvis's family was very poor. They had gardens to help them get food. When they moved to Memphis, things were different. They had to deal with a bigger city and a clear class system. Elvis stood out because he was from a rural area in Mississippi. His classmates thought he was cute, but also laughed at him because he looked and talked differently. It was hard for Elvis's mom and dad too, as they left their family and friends behind in Tupelo. Some of Gladys' family moved to Memphis later, but they still had to live in small. They didn't expect their living conditions to improve just by moving to a different state. When Elvis was young and moved to Memphis, he thought it might be a new beginning. But when a lady named Ms. Richardson came to their boarding house and talked to his mom, he understood why they had to move around a lot and knew that things wouldn't get better soon. This experience shaped Elvis and made him more aware of their difficult situation. Some people think Elvis had trouble keeping things and people because of his close relationship. They also say his depression and love for expensive things caused him to spend a lot. But if we imagine being there with Elvis and his mom in 1949, when they moved hoping for a better life, but they still struggled. Elvis's experiences with poverty might be the key to understanding who he became. As a singer, Elvis could really feel and express emotions in his songs. When he sang "In the Ghetto," he might have been thinking about that difficult time in 1949. It's possible that day, Elvis decided he would take care of his family and work hard to make sure. A report said that Elvis's family needed a better place to live with no privacy. They talked to someone about a place called Lauderdale Courts, which was part of a program to help people. It was built in 1936 and was one of the first government housing projects. Elvis's family lived in a small apartment there for 3 years. Even though it wasn't fancy, it was a stable place for them. Elvis was there from September 1949 to January 1953, and it must have felt. Lauderdale Courts was a place where Elvis's family lived, and it was Elvis went to the same high school, Humes High School, with other kids. Everyone in the community worked hard to support their families. Elvis's dad, Vernon, would leave early in the morning with a lunch bag and go to work. Even though some people think Vernon didn't work enough, Benny Parkins and they all struggled a lot to make ends meet and provide for their families. Elvis's friends remember their parents doing their best with very little money. Living in the courts was seen as a good thing, even though they had to pay rent. The rent was based on how much money they made, so it was easier for them to afford. They also had people check their apartments once a month to make sure they were clean. The women, like Elvis's mom Gladys, worked hard to keep their homes spotless. Elvis's friend Farley Guy remembered how his mom and other women would clean late into the night to prepare for the inspection. The people in charge of the housing, like Jane Richardson, noticed how clean and nice Gladys was. This was probably the first time the Presley family had their own bathroom and indoor plumbing, so they had a lot to be proud of. Elvis Presley had a group of friends, including Buzzy Forbes. They all lived in the same place called the Courts, and they were all poor. They had to work and earn their own money because their parents didn't have much to give them. They would spend their money on movies, drinks, and sometimes clothes. If one of them had extra money, they would share it with the others. They would often go to school together and hang out like normal kids. Contrary to what some people say, they could go out and do things on their own. Elvis was very close to both his mom, Gladys, and his dad. People said Gladys was kind and friendly, while his dad was also a good person who helped shape Elvis's humor. When they lived in a place called Lauderdale Courts, people noticed that Gladys wasn't as healthy as before. Elvis wanted to take care of his parents when he grew up, especially after seeing his mom's health. He was raised to be respectful and hardworking, and he learned to be independent too. Buzzy, a friend, remembered Elvis as a normal student and kid who worked hard. After finishing high school, Elvis really wanted to improve his parents' lives. He didn't talk about going to college, just about finding a good job and working hard. His friend Regis Wilson Vaughn remembered that Elvis wanted to be a good person and support his family. While other kids dreamed of playing sports like football or baseball, he only wanted to take care of his mom and dad. Elvis knew that music could help him achieve his goals. He loved singing and spent time practicing and learning songs from the radio. He would sing late at night on the porch or in dimly lit rooms. Elvis also started to dress differently and flashier than other boys in Memphis. He grew his famous hair with sideburns and a ducktail, which was a bit wild and made him stand out. Some people thought he looked like a juvenile delinquent, but others, especially girls, liked his new look. However, many of the boys with traditional haircuts didn't understand why Elvis wanted to change. They thought it was strange for the shyest boy in class to draw attention to himself by the way he dressed. Elvis's style might have been influenced by famous actors like Tony Curtis, Marlon Brando, and James Dean. The music he heard in his mind was from Memphis, which had different types of music like gospel, country, rhythm and blues, and pop. He and his friends liked listening to black radio stations more because they wanted their own unique style of music, not the popular sound. A local DJ named Dewey Phillips played songs that white kids liked on his radio show, and even Johnny Cash. Dewey knew that many white people secretly listened to race music, which was music. Elvis loved all kinds of music, but he really liked gospel music. He went to late-night gospel shows with his family and enjoyed a group called the Blackwood Brothers. When a sad thing happened to the group, it scared Elvis's mom a lot, and she worried about Elvis. During his high school years, Elvis worked at a few jobs to help support his family. He worked at a company that made rocket shells and then at a factory that made furniture. He was so determined to provide for his parents that he worked long hours and even skipped some sleep. His mom wanted him to graduate, but what really mattered to Elvis was giving his parents a better life. He was willing to do whatever it took, even if it meant working hard and sacrificing some things. During Elvis's high school years, a place called Lauderdale Courts gave his family some stability. But when his mom got a job at a hospital, they moved again a few months later. Elvis was about to graduate and started looking for a job. He really wanted to make things better for his parents. He even prayed for a way to help them when he saw his dad looking sad and worried about money. Elvis's success later in life was like an answer to that prayer. He just wanted a good job to make life easier for his parents. Elvis graduated in 1953 and started working at Precision Tool, then drove a truck. He wanted to become an electrician to support his parents and maybe a family someday. In January 1954, they talked about getting married. Elvis would give most of his $40 weekly paycheck to his parents, only keeping enough for their weekly expense. When he wasn't working, they went to church, Bible study, concerts, and spent time with each other's parents. Dixie's parents were unsure about Elvis at first because of his long hair and different clothes.